Welcome to Ready Set Crypto. This is your brain on blockchain. So if you're looking for how to take advantage of the worst financial crisis in modern history and how to learn to make consistent income through trading against fear, consider our new service Ready Set Trade, which just launched and equips you to build a system to make $100 of profit every day. Our link is in the bio, and only for a short amount of time, you can use the code LAUNCH at checkout for 20% off for life. So get started today. 3 months ago, almost no one knew that SARS-CoV-2 existed. Now the virus has spread across the world, burning through every country, infecting nearly 1 million people we know about, and many more whom we do not. It has become the perfect storm of our darkest dreams. Crashed economies, smashed medical systems, filled hospitals, and emptied communal spaces. It has torn people from their workplaces and their friends. It's disrupted modern society on a scale that many who are alive today have never witnessed. What if has become now what? Being based in the US and specifically Los Angeles, I've never heard highways so quiet and seen fear so loud. By summer, nearly everyone in the US will personally know someone who has been infected. Like World War II or the 9/11 attacks, the pandemic will permanently damage the nation's psyche. It's worth considering that today there are children being born and raised into a society profoundly altered by COVID-19. They are Generation C. They will grow up in a world drastically different from the ones their parents did and will enter an economy that will still be feeling the effects for decades. Already, millions of Americans have lost their jobs due to the coronavirus crisis. 1 in every 5 has had hours cut or been let go, and the worst of the damage is yet to come. Economists project total employment reductions of 47 million people, which would translate to a 32.1% unemployment rate. In contrast, the highest rate of the US unemployment was 24.9% in 1933, at the height of the Great Depression. But before we can hope to address the economics of this crisis, there is an absolute truth. The virus has to be contained first. Humanity is in a fight for its life against an invisible enemy that uses silent weapons for quiet wars. What cannot be stressed enough is how critical the next few months are going to be. The US has fewer hospital beds per capita than Italy does. If the pandemic is left unchecked and mishandled, those beds will all be full by this time next month. In 3 months, there will be 15 times as many patients as beds. In 6 months, the pandemic has the possibility to directly kill 2.2 million Americans, notwithstanding those who will indirectly die as hospitals are unable to care for the usual slew of heart attacks, strokes, and car accidents. Absolutely, we have to do everything we can to prevent this worst-case scenario. To avert that, 4 things need to happen, and very quickly. The first and most important step is to rapidly produce supplies to fight this: masks, gloves, and other personal protective equipment. If healthcare workers can't stay healthy fighting this, the rest of the response will collapse. Just like World War II, a massive logistics and supply chain operation is needed across the country, and that can't be managed by small and inexperienced teams scattered throughout the White House. Instead, this should fall to the Defense Logistics Agency, which has assisted in past public health crises, including the 2014 Ebola outbreak. This agency can also coordinate the second most pressing need: a massive rollout of tests. So far, they've been slow to arrive because of ancillary supply shortages, such as masks to protect those administering the test. Many of these testing and supply shortages are again due to strained supply chains. And even as our manufacturing capacity expands, tests must be used carefully. The primary priority right now is to test healthcare workers and hospitalized patients, allowing hospitals to quell ongoing fires. Only later, once the immediate crisis is slowing, should tests be deployed in a more widespread way to those who are asymptomatic. And even if those 2 needs are met, if we give hospitals and healthcare workers the supplies and testing they need, the spread of the virus and our nation's fate now depends on the 3rd need, which is maintain social distancing. Please listen to me and make sure this is the one thing you take away from this video. The virus does not spread. You spread it. Stay at home. Hospitals are not the solution. They are the war zone. Only you can defeat this virus. Stay at home. This is not the flu, and there is no cure. Stay at home. People are dying. Stay at home. Even if COVID-19 spread is unavoidable, delaying infections can flatten the peak number of illnesses within hospital capacity and significantly reduce the number of deaths. In these dire moments, when the good of all hinges on the sacrifices of many, clear coordination matters, and that is the fourth most urgent need. The importance of social distancing must be impressed upon the public, who must also be reassured and kept constantly informed with clear and concise information. If we refrain from premature policy reversal, like ending social distancing early, if people adhere to social distancing, if testing can be rolled out effectively, and if enough supplies are produced, there is a chance that the country can still avert the very worst predictions. But regardless, and unfortunately, we're already guaranteed to endure this for a long period. Even a perfect response won't end the pandemic. As long as the virus persists somewhere, there's a chance that one person will reignite an outbreak elsewhere. Here's the brutal truth. There are three possible endgames. One that's very unlikely, one that's very dangerous, and one that's very long. The first endgame, and regrettably the most unlikely, is that every nation manages to simultaneously conquer the virus, similar to the original SARS in 2003. Given how widespread the pandemic is at this point, the odds of worldwide containment are withering by the day and the hour. The second possible endgame, and the most dangerous, is that the virus accomplishes what the worst pandemics have: burn through the world until it leaves behind enough immune survivors that eventually it struggles to find viable hosts. This herd immunity scenario does have a positive but morbid result. It would be the quickest. Should be no surprise though that it would also come at a terrible cost and would leave behind millions of corpses and a trail of devastated health systems. So that leaves us with the third possible endgame, and perhaps the most realistically palatable. In this scenario, the world fights the virus for another year, stamping out outbreaks here and there like whack-a-mole until a vaccine can be produced. Some nations will fare better or worse depending on their response to initial contact and remission, but progress will come as the world rallies to mitigate and then rebuild. Importantly, all three possible endgames need a vaccine to ensure COVID-19 is defeated for good. Much like every other source of collective adversity we face as a species, conquering COVID-19 will come down to our ability to organize and innovate. Thankfully, our first steps have been impressively quick. Already, a possible vaccine has gone into early clinical testing, and that marks a 63-day gap between scientists sequencing the virus genes and doctors testing a vaccine candidate, overwhelmingly a world record. But it's also the fastest step amongst many subsequent slow ones. The initial trial will simply tell researchers if a vaccine seems safe and mobilizes the immune system correctly. Researchers will then need to check if it actually prevents infection. Then they'll need to do animal tests and large-scale trials to ensure that the vaccine doesn't cause severe side effects. And finally, they'll need to work out what dose is required, how many shots people need, and how to manufacture and distribute a vaccine to the entire world quickly. Essentially, while it would be wonderful for the vaccine to be in doctors' hands tomorrow, this is not a process that is easily rushed, and for very good reasons. It's more likely then that the coronavirus will be a lingering part of our lives for at least a year, if not longer. If people maintain quarantine and the current round of social distancing measures works, the pandemic may be reduced by enough for things to return to a semblance of normalcy sometime this year. But it has to be gradual. As the status quo returns, so too will the virus. But here's also the good news. Whether through us accumulating herd immunity or through the arrival of a vaccine, the virus will thankfully find spreading more and more difficult. My hope and expectation is that the severity will gradually decline once it hits its peak sometime over the next 3 to 6 months, and there will be less societal upheaval within a year. How short that timeline is comes down to how we respond in this moment, which is why it's so critical to flatten the curve as much as possible by adhering to social distancing. Only then can we start to rebuild. I have to wonder what becomes of us after the dust settles. What I find to be one of the cruelest aspects of this virus is how it's ripped us all apart when we need community the most. At a moment of profound dread and uncertainty, people are being cut off from all human contact. Still, pandemics can also catalyze social change. People, businesses, and institutions have been remarkably quick to adopt or call for practices that they might once have dragged their heels on. Perhaps people of the world, and especially those of us in the US, will learn that preparedness isn't just about masks and vaccines and tests, but also about fair labor policies and a healthcare system that everyone is entitled to. And having internalized years of anti-terrorism messaging following 9/11, Well, Americans have resolved not to live in fear. But COVID-19 has no interest in our terror, only ourselves. The way I see it, we stand at an inflection point that has two distinct and diametrically opposed possibilities, a true crossroads of history. In one potential world, a year from now, we can envision the majority of Americans believe that the US defeated COVID-19 through enduring tenacity. During the second term of his presidency, Trump turns the US further inward and pulls out of NATO and other international alliances. As Gen Z grows up, foreigners and their plagues replace communists and terrorists as a new generational threat. But one could also envision a future in which America learns a very different lesson. A communal spirit, ironically born through social distancing, causes people to turn outward to neighbors, both foreign and domestic. The nation pivots, as it did after World War II, from isolationism to international cooperation. The healthcare workforce surges, and Gen Z kids write school essays about growing up to be epidemiologists and virologists. Public health becomes the centerpiece of foreign policy, and the US leads a new global partnership focused on solving big challenges like pandemics and climate change. Then, in 2030, SARS-CoV-2 emerges from nowhere and is brought to heel within a month. But for now, take care of each other, stay at home, and stay informed. Use this time to better yourself and reflect about how we rebuild going forward, how innovation may become the catalyst of that rebuilding, and what the world will value post-COVID-19. Until then, as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.